Module 3 tackles the two key factors that allow for data manipulation. In one corner you have the variables that allow us to store data, and then you have expressions that allow us to manipulate and change it. So in this example, I'm going to do a couple of variables, and I'm going to use just one or two expressions to get the ball rolling. What are variables? They are named areas within your RAM where you can temporarily store data of all kinds, whether it's text, numbers, dates, and so on. What we can do with that data is then very quickly manipulate. Because it's in RAM, it's very, very fast. We can use that to change it, assess it, evaluate it, and even manipulate it, and then place it back into another data source like SharePoint, Teams, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to be using two variables for this example that I'm going to go through. But I need something to allow me to tweak those variables of data and be able to work with them a bit more creatively. So you have expressions, and expressions are just terms within inside Power Automate that allow us to work with and manipulate the information in some way. So you may already recognize certain Excel functions, and like I did on a previous module, I identified an Excel function called now, and I used that as a way of finding the equivalent inside Power Automate. So I'm going to be using some other examples of this. The book has quite a wide range, and the guided activities touch on various other data types and other data expressions. On top of that, we're going to be also looking at actions. There are certain actions that also work like expressions, which is quite important. So with the expressions built in, you have text, number, logical, and various others. As I said, we've got these actions that are built into Power Automate that kind of work like expressions, but the beauty of it is, rather than me having to string together lots of text and code it together, I can take advantage of that visual diagram building mechanism to put them together. So I'm still building my stationary request solution, and what I want now is some sort of automated process that every Friday midday it goes through my stationary items, gathers all of the items that have been approved but are waiting to be ordered, puts them into a list, and then emails them to me. And later, when we cover scheduled Power Automate flows, I'll show you how we can set that up as a timer job so it does go every Friday at midday and sends it to me. For now though, I'm just going to create again a manual trigger, so I can test it manually and do what I like with it. So I'm going to go back into my Teams flow. I'm going to create a brand new one from the box, and I'm going to again use an instant manually triggered flow. So flow name will be something like the lines of pending items, and then I'm going to again make that a manually triggered flow. Click create. Okay, so this time I'm not going to put any inputs in. I want this to click, I want it to run and be nice and smooth and behind the scenes. What I do need to do though is manipulate the information that's coming in from my SharePoint list. So I need two things. One, I need a count of how many items are pending. So I'm going to create a variable. There we go. Just going to use the variable data connector, and there's all the different array of actions that I have, and I'm going to initialize a variable. So when you create variables, initialize them and makes them exist, it maps them in the RAM ready for use. And at this point I give it the name I need, and then I specify the data type. I can even set an initial value that I want. So it's just the way I work. I create naming conventions that meet a Legitsky or Stan Legitsky or Greg Reddick naming convention that I always using in lots of code languages. So I'm going to put in here int item count, and the first three letters is defining the data value, so I don't have to go looking for where it's initialized to remember what data type it was. So that just represents the fact that this was a integer. Okay, now with the value, I'm going to just set that up as 0, so it starts with a count of 0 items. And then I'm going to increase that by 1 for every item that's been marked as approved. The next option is to do another variable, but I would like this to be an array. Now, some people use this, and it's just purely just a habit that I tend to use var rather than array. I've seen other people use it, and it's kind of a naughty habit I really need to break out of. But the reason I use that is because it represents a variant. I don't know how big this object is going to be. I don't know what it's going to be made up of at this stage. So this is a variant that says I'm going to set aside, but I don't know what it's going to contain. So I'm going to start this up as var items. I use plural because it's going to be a collection of multiple objects, but I need to specify this as an array. Now, when you specify arrays, as you've seen earlier, JSONs sit within a side of a container of brackets. So I just need to start this with an open square bracket and then a close square bracket. Nothing in between. Open square or parameter bracket and close square or parameter bracket, just to the right of your letter P on the keyboard. Okay, and the last thing I want to do is give them better names. So instead of initialize variable to and variable, which is kind of annoying and confusing, I'm going to rename them. And again, another habit I do, I use dim. I just mark this as name as dim, because dim is in some languages dimension, and it just represents the fact that this is the point where I declared the variable. So this is a dim int item count. And I'm going to do the same thing with the one down here. I'm going to dim, or specify this has been dimension declared of a variable. There we go. Great stuff. So what I want to do now is I want to go through my stationery list. Let's just bring this back on screen. I have 4 items, 3 of which have been marked for approval. One has just been raised for requested but not been approved yet, so I don't want that ordered. So I'm going to go back to my flow, and the first thing I need to do is go and get those items. So I'm going to go in and say this is a SharePoint data connector I'm pointing to. Click on the SharePoint data connector, and I'm now going to scroll down and look for get items. So I don't get up the wrong connectors. I want plural, I want items. I've got get items there, and that's the one I'm going to use. Difference between that and that one just gets one selected item. That will get the entire range. That's what I want to do. Okay, same as before, specify the name of the site. I'll grab it by its site name there. Go in and grab the correct list, stationery. Do I want to limit this to a folder area? No, I don't. Do I want to include subfolders? No, I don't care. So I'm going to leave them alone. The only thing I would advise, again, I'll do this later, but when you're putting in huge amounts of data, you want to be careful about the limiting columns by view, because if you don't, what will happen is it'll pull down all the columns, all the records, and that's a huge amount of information. You're pulling down the pipeline over the internet, and you're probably only going to manipulate 1 or 2 columns. So I leave it alone while I'm testing, and then when I'm happy, what I do is I go into SharePoint and create a view that specifies what columns I need, filtered, sorted, grouped, whatever I need, and it just makes it easier for me to then pull the correct items in, and I then use the view name when it appears at the bottom of this list. So at the moment I'm just going to leave that empty, and I'll come back to that later if necessary. So I'm going to collapse that. That's all done. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and get a new name for that says get approved stationery items. So a little bit more specific to what that's doing. Okay. Here's where the magic begins. So what's going to happen is it's now going to go through each item and then check to see if the status is the word approved, and then we're going to do all the lovely work with the variables. Now, if I click New Step, go to Control and use a condition, At the moment, that is only going to run once, and that's going to run on one item. I want this to repeat over and over again through all the items. Now, we cover logical connectors and looping connectors later, but I need this quite early. So I'm going to introduce you quite early to the first loop connector, which is apply to each. So you can see, if I zoom these in, you can see that these work in sort of sets. And these two here, apply to each and do until, are looping connectors. They will basically repeat the same actions over and over again until the end of the loop. The difference between each is with apply to each, it knows how many times it needs to loop. Do until doesn't know how many times, so I have to put in some sort of logical test that says do this until this happens, or until this value is true, and then it stops. Okay. Condition and switch, these are logical, and these also match because they're dark grey, so they have a dark grey background. So the idea of the colouring is also to outline the fact that they are paired, or they are grouped into particular types of controls. So again, I'm going to use the apply to each, and then I say, well, okay, what is it that I'm looping through? I'm looking through the value of all the list items. So I'm going to grab the value box from the get approved stationary items. Now I put my condition inside that. Okay, so click the control data connector and choose condition. Brilliant stuff. And in here, I'm going to say do until. I'm going to pull down from the items I've just grabbed. I want the status, but be careful, because when you actually work with a drop-down list box, you get the name of the drop-down list box and then the name again with value at the end. It's the value of the list box that's been currently stored that I want. So I'm going to use the status value, and that's where it is equal to, and I'm going to zoom in there and mark that as approved. Bear in mind, very important, case sensitive, use the value exactly with the uppercase, lowercase that you've stored in your SharePoint list. Okay, if true, if it's yes, then this is what it's going to do. First of all, as it finds an approved item, we would like that first variable, which was the int count of items, to increment. I would like to increase it by 1 and increase the count. So I'm going to use the increment variable, and all I've got to do is tell it which variable to increment and then by how much. So I want that to increase by 1 in that option there. So lovely little feature there. Now the next one is then to take that row of data, that item, grab some of the properties, some of the column fields, and place them into my array. So I'm going to add an action, again using the variable connector, and this is to append to the array of variable. There we go. The name of the variable again is that var items, and the value that I put in here is where we start doing our JSON thing. So a bit early, but I love showing this because it's a nice simple way of explaining how the JSON is required and how it works. So I'm going to go in and put in my first squiggly or brace. Okay, and I'll zoom this in so you can see it better. And then what you do is you then start piling through there the name that you want to put to the property. You can make this up, you can call it whatever you like. And it can be completely contradictory to what the name of the column is that you're grabbing. So I pass that in speech marks. So let's say I want to grab first of all the name of the item. So I'm just going to put item in there, and that goes in double quotes. And then outside of that you put a colon. So that's there I'm saying I'm now going to tell you what value to assign to that item heading. And here I'm going to go into my list, and I'm going to go and find the item field. There it is. Okay, that's it. So that's how you work with an array in JSON with different properties and values. So if I want to put multiple ones in, add a comma, I press enter, or you don't have to press enter, but I press enter to make it nice and tidy, just makes it looks good. And I'm going to go in and now pass the quantity. It's called the QTY field, but just to show, it doesn't have to match. It can be whatever wording you want, as long as you're consistent with that sort of word that you pass through. So inside double quotes, colon, and now I'm going to grab the QTY field that's sitting in my SharePoint list. Okay, if that was an Excel table, I'll be getting data from the Excel table and again grabbing the field or the column of that and manipulating it. For SharePoint, like I demonstrate, is so much easier, so I do SharePoint as an example. Okay, I'm going to carry on. What else can I grab? I'll grab the name of the person who actually created or raised that. So I'm going to put in there requested by, and again I'm going to put that in quotes, colon, and then I'm going to pass through the value. Now whether you pass the value inside sets of quotes or not is entirely up to you. Usually it's quite clever and tidies up for you, so I tend to not do it, but if you get any errors, bear in mind that especially with text strings, and you want to make sure that it's stored correctly, you can pass it inside another set of quotes. There's no harm there, and you could even do it with the quantity as well, but I just choose not to do that. So if I get problems, I will probably put the quotes in later and resolve that. Requested by, I'm going to go and grab the requested by fields, there they are, but I just want the display name, I just want the user's name listed there. There we go. Comma. Now be careful, as I don't know if you sort of play the, just rewind the video a few seconds. As soon as I click that requested display name, and this happens sometimes, is the cursor will just move. It just goes all up. So now that I put my comma in, it's put it in the wrong place. So watch out for that. It's a bit of a naughty. If I take that requested by out and put it in again, see where my cursor is. I'm going to go and click on the display name, and it where it moves it, I don't know, it just likes to play hide and seek. So watch out for that, it's a bit naughty. Just keep your eye on it, put your cursor back, carry on working. Okay, last thing I'm going to do is I want to go and grab the date of the field. So I'm just going to do this simply by saying requested colon, and then I'm going to go and get the requested field. But if you remember, that pulls the date in a very sort of structured way, which is great for passing data through that year dash month dash date t hours minutes seconds in colons. So that I want to present that a bit cleaner in a moment. I'm going to show you how we can do that when I put that data into the field. I'm finished. So I have all of my properties and their values separated by commas. Last thing I do now is just close that bracy thing down. There we go. Job done. So I'm now going to collapse that up. Looks good. The last thing I now want to do is I want to have my apply to each repeat through all the items, and it's going to check each one to see if it's approved. If it is, it comes down here. If not, it just skips, doesn't do anything, carries on. And then when it's finished, when the apply to each loop is finished, I then want it to grab all of the data and put it into an email. So there's two more steps I want to do. I'm going to come to the bottom here and make sure, it's very, very important, I am coming below the apply to each. I've got to put this outside and below the apply to each. It's going to say only do this once the apply to each is finished. So I'm going to click new step, and the first thing I'm going to do, because what the things you could do with arrays in Power Automate is just simply magic. And one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to use a data operation. There's a data operation connector, and I want to take that data array of all the items it's found, and I want to put it into an HTML table. And the beauty of it is, it just does all the work for me. I haven't got to do a thing. All I've got to tell it is what I want to put into a table. So I click in there, and I say, go and get my variable of all my items, and pop it in. So it will know that the property that I put before the colon is the heading at the top row of the table, and it will know that each row or each array value then goes underneath it in the multiple rows below. Now it's going to look a bit crude, and I will tidy it up in a moment, but for now that would do perfect. So I've now built the table. The last thing to do with that is place that into an email. Again, I just like to use the send me a notification. They're nice and clean, and I don't need to go crazy or mad with these things at all. So I'm going to do a notification as an email. Send me an email notification. Subject will be, and I'm going to put in here the number of items. So I'm going to put the item count. Items require ordering. Maybe I should put stationary items require ordering. There we go. So that's a nice subject line at the top of the notification. I'm just going to put in there, please order the following, and again I'll put the count in again, items. Now, the only thing that's going to break that is if the item count is 1. It's going to look weird with 1 and items. There are clever things I could do around that. There are things I could use to manipulate, again in variables, to make that a bit friendlier. I'm going to leave it alone. I'm not going to go crazy. And I'm just going to go underneath that now. And the last thing I'm going to do is going to go and grab that HTML table that's built for me and stick it underneath. So I'm just going to go into the list again, find the create HTML table. There's only one option in there, and that dynamic content I want is the output. I think that's ready to go. So I'm going to zoom that out, just give it a quick save. Yeah, looks good to me. A little pop-up comes up, which I'm going to ignore. And now I'm going to go and test it. So click the test button. I'll perform the trigger action. Save and test. Okay. Yeah, happy with those data connectors you're using. Run the flow. And it says it started successfully. Good. Let's see if it's finished successfully. So I'm going to click done. Yeah, not only has it done that, as again, from the test point of view, it's showing me the outputs. So I could, at this point, just go in and have a look at the table first. So I'm going to have a look at the table. There you go, there's my data. There's the 3 items that were marked as approval. And also, in the apply to each, which is really good on the outputs, if I expand that, what you'll see in apply to each, there's a navigation bar that allows me to look through every item, every step or process in the SharePoint list, and what did it do. So the first one, obviously the approved word couldn't be found, so that was false. If I click next, yeah, that one was true. 3rd record, that was true. 4th record, that was true. I'm happy, so that kind of makes sense. Now let's go and have a look. So if I go to any other tab, so I'm going to pop into my Outlook. It has worked because there's the email. So with the actual subject line at the top there, 3 stationary items require ordering. There I've got it again. And there's my table. As I say, the table, not brilliant, is it? It's looking a bit messy. Go into Flow and edit that flow. And the idea is, this is a lovely little feature. I'm going to get it to build the table. But then afterwards, I'm going to get it to manipulate it and change it in some way. Make it a little bit more prettier looking. So to do this, I'm going to use another data operation. Here we go. I'll zoom this in so you can see it. And it's called Compose. What it does is allows me to use all types of expressions to pull the data in, have the expression manipulate the data in some way, and then output it so that I can take the end result of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to a nice text-based expression called replace. So that's going to end up in here. So as you do, you go into your little dynamic content window. I'm going to click on the expression box here, and I'm going to type in replace, and there is the expression I want. Open parenthesis bracket, pops up, tells you what it does. This is effectively find replace. Now, what I've done is built a HTML table. So I'm going to get it to find some HTML code. And in particular, I'm going to get it to find the table tag bracket. I'm going to replace it with the same table tag bracket, but with some extra formatting in it, like make the border thicker, make the width of the table wider, and even set the background color to make it a little bit fancier. You could add CSS in here, you could go crazy with this thing, but I'm just going to keep it quick and simple. So click inside there, and the first thing it was asking for, just recap that, is the text I'm looking to manipulate, what the old text is going to look for, and then what text it's replacing it with. So the old text was in the body. Okay, I'm grabbing the body of a particular value, and the body is that create HTML table. So I've got to pass that name of that action in there. So create. And in many respects, when you're actually working with names that have got spaces in them, just be careful, because some work, some don't. If they don't, use underscores to replace the spaces. So create HTML underscore table. It is case sensitive, so it needs to be exactly as it's been placed up there. So I'm going to use that create HTML table with the capital C, and that looks good to me. So it's getting the body content of that action. Brilliant. Next, what's it going to do? Find. So what we're finding, I want you to find the old table tag bracket. HTML is normally compiled in lowercase characters. So again, just sort of pass through and look for that. Superb. Okay, what do you want to do with that? Well, what I want to do, comma, is replace it with the following. So same thing, it's going to be a table tag, but I'm going to add a space and then start adding some attributes to that tag. So I want the border of that to be equal to 3. Notice I've been using a lot of single quotes, because now with these attributes you normally assign the values of these in double quotes, so this just stops them getting a bit conflicted. So brilliant. Space. What else do I want? I want the width of the table much wider. Let's set it to, I don't know, 400 pixels. There we go. And I'm not going to specify the specimen, so it'll just use pixels by default. And I'm going to put in space, and then I want the background color, and that's BG color, American spelling, COLOR, equal speech marks, and then you just specify like the hexadecimal. So how much red? Let's say very, very low red. Good amount of green. Less amount of blue. See how that works. And then close those quotes down, and then close the table tag bracket down again. There we go. So I'm hoping that'll work, because one of the horrible things about this, you don't get a very big window to work in there. Sometimes it's better to open up something like Microsoft Notepad, or if you have Notepad++, which is like a very fancy free tool that actually gives you color coding based on the type of language you're working on. So I'm going to just go in here, and I'm going to just open up regular old Notepad. Pops up on screen. I'm going to paste that in there, and all I do is just going to make that bigger so I can see it, and it just gives me a better angle. Have I got my brackets in the right places? Have I closed it down? And so on and so forth. Adjust it accordingly, and then copy and paste it back into my expression window. There we go. And once I've done that, I just click OK, and that now puts my expression into the compose. So it's pulling in the input of the table, HTML table, and then the composer's purpose is to allow me to push the output out. The only thing I've got to do now is say to the email, oh, by the way, I don't want that old boring output that I had in the HTML table. What I want to do instead is grab the new glossy one that's in my compose box. So make sure it's a bit misleading, but you can see there are two of them. So once again, reiterating, make sure you find the correct one for the correct action or trigger. So I'm just going to drag that in, or you can just select that in, John. What are you doing? There you go, and that's all ready to go. Let's see how good that looks now. So I'm going to save the flow, test it again. Yeah, run that flow now. Off we go. Thank you very much. If I go back to my email, refresh the page, and my new one, there it is, comes in. And yeah, it's not the greatest color, it's a QA themey color, but nevertheless you can see it's actually improved the look and feel of it. One more thing I want to do, so I've shown you an expression, which is the replace function. There's lots of different ones that you see in the book that you can play with, and the guided activities give you some different variances, and I don't like using the same ones again. I like a bit of variety in the training course. So this is the last thing I want to do. I want that looking better. It just looks horrible. So there's so many different ways I can do this. There are so many ways that I could make that better. All I want to do is just make that look like a proper date. So I'm now going to use one of those actions that act like expressions as my example. So I'm now going to go back to my flow, and I'm going to edit that and show you how I can improve the date format. So I'm inside my flow again, and what I want to do is I want to grab the date that I'm seeing, and I want to tidy it up and make it better. Now I could go crazy with this and do the date, the year, the month, and the hours, minutes, seconds. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to keep it very simple. And what I'm going to do is find for each date that comes in. And you see the great thing about the way the date comes in, it is years, months, date, time, hours, minutes, seconds with colons. And because I know the position of the characters, what I want to do is get what we would say a substring of the data and extract different elements and pull them into different variables. So I'm going to just use 3 variables. One that's going to pull in the year, one that's going to pull in the month, and one that's going to put in the date. And then when I'm finished, I'm going to concatenate them back together in the order that I prefer, and use forward slashes instead of hyphens. So I'd like it to look like a proper date. Now, very important when you do this, the substring is required. The purpose of the substring is to find a character starting position and then tell it how many characters you want to extract. So if I look at this example date, the substring value itself that I'm grabbing is this requested date. So I'm going to put all that in. But what I'm going to say is tell it the starting position. Bear in mind, starting positions start at 0. So that is the 0 position for the string. And I want it to go and grab the first 4 characters. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is now the 4th position. And then the next one would be sort of going past starting from the 5th position, so it skips the hyphen and does 2 characters, and so on and so forth. Okay. So this one's going to be from 0 to 4. The next one's going to be from the 5th position, 2 characters, and then the next one will be like the 8th string. Edit the formula. First thing I need to do is declare a variable. So I'm going to initialize a variable, and I'm going to call it, it's a string type of variable, and I'll call it string nice date. Okay, and I don't want any value in there. It's going to be empty to begin with. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to edit that name and call it dim str nice date. Okay, so that needs to be declared or initialized anywhere. It doesn't matter where it goes, as long as it's above where I'm going to borrow it. But the most important thing is don't ever initialize a date, a variable inside a loop of any kind. It can only be initialized or declared once. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my condition. If it's approved, go and get the item count, And then I'm going to, first of all, extract all three elements of the year, the month, and the date. And I'm going to use a text function. Okay, so we talked about these text functions and these other time functions, and there's also number functions that act like expressions. And the one I want is the substring. So what am I extracting? That's the requested date. Starting position where the year is, it starts at position 0, and I want it to get the first 4 characters. So that's 2020, 2020, 4 characters. And so I know what that is. I'm going to rename that and call it get year. I could create that again and again and again. I'm going to cheat here. I'm going to go to the menu here for this action and copy this to the clipboard. And then I'm going to click underneath it, add an action, and I'm going to use my clipboard and paste it in. That gives it a new, same name again, but with year 2. So first all I'm going to do is going to specify that is getting the month. Just a time saver, because all I've got to do in here then is just say start from the 5th position, because that's 2020 2020 hyphen, that's 5, and just grab 2 characters. Good stuff. Okay, and I could get any one of these. I'm just going to copy that again just for demonstration purposes, and then go underneath it and add an action. And this is just to show that when you do work with a clipboard, it does store multiple actions. And if you don't name them properly, if I'd actually left that alone, you would have had, it would be very difficult to know which one's which. So I just want to copy the month one, expand that, and same again. I just want to grab, so from the 5th and 6th, skip the 7th, start from the 8th, and grab that. 2 characters. Okay. That will be called get. I'm going to put day, not date, because it gets confusing. So the day element of a date. Okay. So I've used the text function to extract the elements I want. And the last thing to do now is to set my variable that I did earlier, which is my str nice date. So I'm going to set that. So I'm going to use a variable again, and I'm going to use a set variable. So I want to set the str nice date by creating an expression. And on the right hand side, I'm going to go into the expression window, and I'm going to use the concat to concatenate or splice together all those elements with forward slashes in between. So I'm just going to get, you can tell basically all the arguments are just different strings you want to splice together. So my first string would be the get day. Let's see if I can find that one. Ah, look at that. Substring. I'm just going to get the get day there. Comma. So that's the day going in. Now I want to put a forward slash. So do single quote, forward slash. Lovely. Comma. Now I want to go and get the month. You can see the horribleness of this very limited size box now, because it's not very useful, not very helpful at all. Comma. And in single quotes another forward slash, comma after that, and my 5th and final string is the year. So if I can go and find that, there it is, and hopefully just make sure I've got, yeah, there's the year. Okay, so I'm going to click OK on that one, and now I've got my set variable, which I'm going to say get the nice date. Okay, so now I've got a nice clean date. I need to put that into the HTML table, which the output is going to do for us. So I'm going to come out of here, and as you can see, my array, instead of using the old requested date, I'm going to remove that and instead now go and get my nice date. There we go. And now underneath that, the table will create, posting that lovely niceness, and then compose it into a nice sea green, sickly blue that we can use. So I'm going to save this. That's a lot of work. Normally I'll do little elements, test it, and then look at the outputs, but I want to get through and just give you something you can rewind and play as much as you like. There we go. Now, this is a very, very important thing, because we do look at concurrency control and what that does. Concurrency allows us to specify, because I'm repeatedly setting the value in a for each. So it's saying, look, you know, if I run this, I could run 10 items at a time, 20 items at a time. How can I do that with one variable? So what it's saying is I need to set the concurrency to 1. Now, when I go into settings, there's normally an option at the top that says concurrency control, and then you enable or disable it. I can't see that. So in this track properties, if I don't do anything about this, it's going to have a bit of a wibbly wobbly, but for some reason this shouldn't really work. But if I put in there concurrency, spelt correctly, and set that to 1, what I'm saying is the for each should only do 1 item at a time. Not 10 items, not 100 items. The faster, the more items you get it to process in the for each, the quicker it will work. But the more the more you're actually running on the Office 365, is like pushing the boundaries, pushing the thresholds. So, and because I'm only using the variable, I've only got one variable, one bit of memory to do this. I could have put it in an array, didn't want to do that. I just want to set the date and change it for 1 item at a time. So I'm going to set that concurrency to 1. Now that shouldn't actually do anything, but for some reason it shuts it up. And if I remove it, it fixes it. I think it's more of a glitch that I've dealt with the situation. But we do look at concurrency. We do look at that in the Emulator module and some of the advantages and pitfalls of doing that. So I'm going to save that. And I'm now going to test the function. It seems to have shut up the argument, it's shut up the window. So let's see if it does perform. I'm going to perform the trigger action, save and test, and then run it. There we go. Let's see if this does its job. Seems to have worked. Proof is in the Outlook pudding. There's my flow. 3 items, lovely date. There are other things. I could have actually turned that into the actual month. So I could have actually had the formatting to say April rather than 04. I think, as you can see, there's enough in this video to get you really looking at how we can use variables and expressions to totally manipulate the data, mess around with it as much as we want, and get the best out of that. Now I can order those items for my staff. As well as there being many different expressions that you can work with in your Power Automate, what you also have is various other different function types that work like expressions. So I've just used the substring, which is one of the 2 types of text function. You have date and time actions as well. And you've also got a number formatting action, which allows you to manipulate data like currencies and put currency against some value or cost, if you like. There you go. So we've had a little example of variables and some expressions, and what we've also looked at is some different types of data connectors using the text function there.